Hi and welcome. I'm just going to do a quick rundown of what I've done for the Tabletop Simulator mod for the Odysseys, and kind of talk through a few of the approaches I've taken to the coding of this. I'm hoping that this will help other people who are also doing Tabletop Simulator mods. I've gotten a lot out of having a look at other people's code, and hopefully this I can pass this on a little bit. Yeah. So I'll do a quick tour to start with. I think for me, the thing that I've mostly been focusing on is how do I build this in such a way that means that it's easy to extend and easy to add more things and also easy to update. So one of the key things is all the things that are decks start as decks. So if I want to change this deck, I can do that really easily. For a while, I did start with everything like laid out, but that just makes it way harder to update them as they go. Or even little things like this deck, I actually end up with 2 copies of it, but now I actually do that in code when I need to. But yeah, so very quickly, let's see how this actually runs. So the first thing is I basically have a setup script. Because I have a special player called Fate that you need, I run the setup on that. And this is a one-way setup. Once it happens, it can't be undone. So we have all this. So this is all the islands and so on and so forth. And then you have all of your cheat sheets and that sort of thing. So that's just to get the game going. I then have Fate has this little deal card. That's not going to do a huge amount right now because it depends on there being players seated, other players seated. So it's going to deal out destinies and values and a bunch of other things to each of those cards. It'll also double this deck. So we press deal. You see that that's doubled that. Yeah, it's also shuffled these and dealt out 0 of them because there's no one seated. Just say we then we do get seated. So the big thing is that I essentially have these objects that when you go into one of these players, it'll automatically create them. That's interesting. That should be deleting these. So there is a little bit of a bug clearly. Yeah, that's going to double that. So that's something I'll work on. Whatever. It's not going to delete them anyway. But yeah, it is. And again, there's only one source of these mortal action cards, and then every time someone sits down, it's doing that. It should be deleting them when it goes out, but that's clearly not working. That's fine. Okay, so let's have a look at how I've done this. I've actually this. Let's go back to the original. Oh, yeah, that's fine. So you can see nothing set up and that sort of thing. So I've kind of anything that's set up kind of like this. Any sort of one-way operations, I'm generally more okay with that being on the card itself. So the beliefs actually, because this doesn't necessarily happen at the start of the game, it happens at a certain point. Whenever you press it, it's going to make a copy of that same deck of 4 and then give it to every seated mortal player. And so you can, this for instance is just a script that is on that deck. You can see here, it's pretty simple. And it's got a button on it. It's just waiting and sending it out to each player. That one's a pretty simple one. And in general, I like things being on their objects. I am very careful, like this deck should never go away. If this deck does go away, it means something else has gone wrong, because I am copying it when I do things. The other version of this is when Fate presses their deal card, there's a bunch of these individual decks that also do something. So for instance, if I go to this script, whoops, that's not that script. Oh yeah, I am doing that on what I'm calling Fate controls, which is that little checker. There's a checkers piece underneath that. And so here, I'm literally just grabbing each of the things. I'm going to do a single thing. And then in the case of the Odysseys actions, I'm just doing it in this script. This is probably one of the messier approaches. I would probably change this if I did it again, but there's not much point now, it's good enough. And then, yeah, and then I'm calling deal on them. So I kind of have this idea that like objects know what deal means. I could even just make a list of these and then call deal on all of them would be another way of doing it. The destinies are working a little bit differently because I need to keep track of which destinies have been, have been dealt. This also then deals with, because that deal card turns into a hide and reveal card that lets Fate reveal and hide the destinies that they've got for other players. So we then go to, the values deck. It just has a really simple deal thing where it's just shuffling and then dealing something to every single player. So that's pretty simple. That's quite nice. All good so far. Now let's start looking at these other things. So you'll notice if I go back here that I have a bunch of these manager objects. And you might be wondering where these manager objects are. So we'll first look at these. Manager of deck setups, this is the thing that's being triggered. So if we scroll to the right place, to the events, this is being triggered when Fate first sits down. And I've got a setup when Fate sits down and a tear down when Fate gets, when someone removes himself from that seat. Right now the tear down does nothing. At one point I wanted to undo all of the things, but it became clear that that was more complicated than it was worth. And so I've just got the setup. So first things first, all of these manager objects right at the top, I've got this visibility thing, and on load I am calling a global function which is called set visible. So this global function knows how to make things visible and invisible. And when I say that, I mean these things are pretty invisible. So what I can do if I want to actually see this, which I do every so often, so let's go to the manager of deck setups. I just change this to true and I reload it. Oops. And you can see this is here. This is literally a card that has a completely transparent front and back. It has a black outline on it, so you can barely see it, and it has a name, so you can do it. And there's like 5 of these. So if I go through this, and the nice thing here is that this visibility thing, I can just set it on each of these if I want to see it, if I want to change their names, which I do from time to time, all that sort of stuff. Oops. What am I doing? Oops. I am being very bad at typing. But if I want to change these, let's do that. Let's make sure that these are actually right. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So now I think I've got most of them, but not all of them. So yeah, now you can see, yeah, you're missing one of them. And each of them then has their own thing. The nice thing is, yeah, again, these do not have to be visible until they are visible, until they show up. And so for instance, this one, manager of deck setups, that's literally just all of these decks that are being set up automatically. It is dealing with all of those. So let's stop being Fate so that we can actually see this. So let's be Game Master. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. These 4 decks are being managed by this. So for this one, all I've got, this has kind of become more and more genericized over time. This was actually quite specific at the start. But what I've done is I've done a thing where each deck, you set up a scripting zone that goes around it, and it will then find the deck that is in that zone. So that way, if you change the name, if you change the idea of the actual deck, it's fine. The zone will find the deck that's there. It will then, if you define player hand, it'll just deal that deck straight into their hand. If you define positions, it will deal out to those positions as many positions as you've done. So if you have 10 cards in 7 positions, it'll only deal 7 cards. Mostly I've got the number of cards -1 because the first card is in the right place. And then if it says shuffle to true, it'll actually shuffle it first. Otherwise, so this one, literally the static islands, these are the 2 islands from the start and finish because they are static. And it'll then do that. Again, this is a deck of 2 cards that if I want to change it, there's a single image. And so otherwise, every time I update it, I'm going to have to bring it back in and do that all manually. Now I can just update it in Tabletopia, not worry about redoing it, Tabletop Simulator, and not worry about moving things back and forward. And that's mainly it. And then I have another thing called lock equals true. And then, this is no longer necessary. That's an old version. So there is a little bit of old code. Mostly I've done a decent job of getting rid of it. So yeah, here I've got a zone. I'm getting the zone from the ID. Then I get the deck from that zone. So I have a little script that checks that something is a deck using the tag. And then I'm going to check if it's looking for player hand. And if it's looking for player hand, I'm going to deal it to that player. If it's got positions defined, then I'm going to deal it to those positions, and so on and so forth. And take card after time literally just like means that I'm dealing them one at a time. I'm using the GUIDs to make sure that this works properly. Yeah, so that's been quite nice. I then similarly, what other managers do we have? We have player mats. Okay, let's talk about players. The other bit of magic. This one is the one that's false. Okay, so let's have a look at this. What's happening here? This is actually kind of similar in how I've done it. So we've got this model player thing, and when I become a player, stuff rains from the sky. How is that happening? How that is happening is literally I am. I think I know why this. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. When stuff rains from the sky, this is how I'm doing it. I am. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make this true. So in the same way I've got this is visible thing, I've got our bags interactable. And there's a couple of functions here called hide bag and show bag that says what happens to that bag when it's hidden or shown. And that can be updated over time. So right care. And you can see there are actually bags here, and each player has their own bags. In those bags, if I search them, you can see that we've got all of these objects, some of which are generic and some of which are specific to the player. They all have names that are very important, so I do use the names. So these 4, it's exactly the same in every single bag, and then these 2 are different. And then literally all I do is I have this object data, which has the name here. So this is what's it's gonna search for this name. And if it finds, basically it'll take the object out of the bag. If the name is there, it's going to then put it into that position relative to each player has a base position, essentially. And then I've got some rotation, some interactable, that sort of thing. Again, some flags of how it's supposed to be done. So if I wanted to add new objects, so actually at one point I was doing willpower through this as well. I changed my mind about that because willpower changes based on the number of players. But it means that at any point I could add willpower, or I could add a second treasure, and suddenly there's going to be 2 treasures there for a player rather than 1. And literally it's just based on what's in the bag. And that's just going to determine what happens here. Yeah, and so again, this is basically run off on player change color. I'm going to check whether I'm able to check whether that player has been initialized. So the player objects player. So this is literally, I've got a table that contains all of the objects belonging to that player. And if that table doesn't exist, then I need to, if that player doesn't exist, I need to make it, which is over here. But if the player does exist, the player is no longer seated and the player objects do exist, then I need to tear it down. And then again, I have my setup and tear down functions. I'm not going to go into exactly all the code. Let me know if you want access to it and I'll get you access. But that's basically how it's working. The final thing that I've done that's works pretty well is I had all these things that were every single player had to do them. So like these ship trackers, so these things here. And these scripts were really frustrating because whenever they made sense to be on these objects, but at the same time, whenever I made a change, I had to change it for every single one. And that was really frustrating. So what I did instead was I've now got this manager that runs all of the ship trackers, for instance. And then each manager has the UI of the actual thing that I want, but everything's turned active equals false. So that way, and then what I do is I literally at some point on setup, I'm going to grab the UI from this object. I'm going to set it to the UI of the card that's being created. And this setup is being actually called by the model player's setup. So it actually knows that these are 3 other managers that care about when this one is set up and torn down. That it needs to tell them what's happening, and it does that, which is great. And then I also set Lua script, so I'm actually generating a little Lua script. I could actually make this more generic, but literally all this does is it forwards the events, like on increase, on decrease, from the new card that I've added the button to, and moves it to here. But actually then just sends me the color of the player as well, which means I have everything I need to run to figure out what player it is, and to do everything else. Yeah, so that's been really nice because it means that right now everything here can be quite generic, and I can just, if I need to change the way this works, I just change it in this one place. And that can be something as simple as I need to change the names to there needs to be different numbers of constants and that sort of thing. So that's kind of how I've approached this. Oh yeah, and the player mats. The player mats is just, this is a thing where when something enters this area, it's visible to yourself and to Fate, but no one else. But that's, yeah. That's pretty simple. Yeah. Yeah, if there's anything else that you have, if you have questions about anything, let me know. That's how I've approached it. If there's anything you want to know more about or you want me to go into more detail on, I'd be up for going into this in more detail. Just let me know in the comments. Cheers.